Hello and welcome to a mindful moment. How are you, Melissa?
I am pretty good, Teresa. How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. It's getting close to the end of the week. I'm ready for the weekend. So today, I wanted to talk about, I was actually doing research on changing habits because of all the challenges people are having with technology, stopping. And I got sucked down the infamous rabbit hole related to addiction, which
Mm.
actually caught my attention, especially because I found it really interesting. Some of the research that's come out about mindfulness and addiction. So I thought maybe we could talk about that today because in the research I found, wow, most of us are addicted to something. And I
Oh, I don't
didn't,
doubt it.
I I didn't think about it. And, I always think of substance
Mhm.
addictions. That's not all we're addicted to, right? So just substance addiction, there's almost 50 million people in the US alone that have addictions.
Wow.
But
Wow.
then when you extrapolate out to what is now all kinds of behaviors, I had read years ago in Eckhart Tolle had written something about that most people don't realize that we can become addicted to thinking. So I kind of looked into that a little bit, like we think all the time, how can we be addicted to it? But it's really about how many people get addicted to ruminating and over planning and feeling like they have to think through every possible and I'm like, okay, that's like half my clients.
Yeah,
So
that
okay,
makes sense though, actually.
yeah.
It's interesting because when we were talking about this topic, I kind of looked up, what makes it an addiction? When does it move past a habit and into addiction? And talking about the behavioral thing, they didn't actually even consider behaviors addictive until like the mid 70s. There was a book written called Love and Addiction. And I guess it was a pretty popular book. I don't know. But that's when they were talking about how love can actually be, certain types of love can be more harmful to you than even substance, chemicals, whatever it is. And so that's kind of when other people started jumping on board with, behaviors really can be an addiction. And I just found it fascinating. There's so many behaviors we have that can be addictive.
Yeah. I mean, we always think of sort of the because addiction, one way to think of it is really it's compulsive behavior.
Mm-hmm.
A habit is automatic behavior. It's usually not harmful. It could be irritating or annoying to yourself or others. You if you're not aware of it, you just do it automatically, like driving a car. I mean, there's nothing detrimental about that.
Yeah.
But addiction, one of the definitions was addiction is the continued use or behavior that you're doing, regardless of adverse consequences.
Mm-hmm.
So even though you are starting to harm yourself or others, you can't stop doing it. And that's what really makes it an addiction.
Yeah. Yeah. And
It-
I think there's a lot of things that, can help with addiction. And obviously, we are not addiction therapists, but I do know that if you can come from a place of mindfulness or even not even mindfulness, which is kind of the same thing, but self-awareness, where when you can recognize that this habit is no longer a habit and that it is harmful, I think that's where a lot of people don't even realize they're in addiction,
right.
because they don't have that self-awareness to go, this is actually harming me and I can't seem to stop.
Yeah. Well, technology is a good example of that
Mm-hmm.
because a lot of people will say they're not addicted to
Oh, I
whether
think
it's,
I would say 90% of us are addicted to technology.
yeah, definitely. But to get back to your point, this is not to advocate for self-help if you have, especially a substance addiction.
Mm-hmm.
There's all kinds of professional options, whether it's therapy or clinics or rehab or medication. Overcoming a substance addiction on your own, I would not advise it. I would seek help.
Mm-hmm.
But for a lot of the behavioral addictions, and there are a lot of them, I'll just give you a short list here: shopping, working, pining over someone, that's that obsession with another person,
Yeah.
gaming, sex, social media, pornography, devices, relationships, stimulants. Stimulants is a weird one. I don't
You
necessarily
can be
mean like,
stimulated by behavior. I mean,
yeah,
right?
yeah. Daydreaming, gambling, streaming, thinking, even marijuana. There's always been this debate, is marijuana addictive? And so when I was reading yesterday about marijuana itself, I don't think that they have any proof that the drug itself is addictive,
Yeah.
but the behavior is addictive. You want that feeling of just chilling out, or you get into the habit of every day you know what I mean? And so the behavior becomes the addiction, which I thought was
I personally, I'm not a scientist, but I think it's addictive. I know people that consume it, and I just feel like once they get back on it, it's like they don't stop. And it is because they're addicted to the feeling,
yeah,
like you
yeah.
said.
If you are a heroin addict, you are addicted to the feeling. But the point
Yeah.
is, the brain chemistry takes over. And I don't
Hmm.
know. I mean, again, there's always a debate about marijuana. So to circle back around to mindfulness on this, substance addiction, please consider therapy or professional help. But behavioral, only you can decide. But mindfulness can support you in this. And the reason is addiction is really developed through brain chemistry, plain and
Hmm.
simple. So if we understand how our brains work, it really helps clarify why mindfulness is effective, which we'll get into more in a little while. And there are also increased risks, genetic factors. So if your parents had a substance addiction, you need to be really aware of that so that you can try to prevent yourself from falling into the same trap.
Hmm.
Oh, and also mindfulness can complement. So if you have a substance addiction, you can still use mindfulness to complement whatever kind of therapy you're in, because there's a lot of benefits to that too, which we'll cover. But if we understand how the brain works, then we start to understand that the brain has what's called a reward system. And our brain is really oversimplification here, but we kind of have two brains. We have the old brain and new brain, right? So the old brain's been around since we got here. And the new brain is much newer. Now, I don't mean it's brand new by any means, but it's much newer than the old brain. And so the old brain is really, the way it developed was for pure survival.
Hmm.
It uses what's called a reward-based learning system. And the point of that would have been, again, all about survival. So, old brain is where our fight or flight response is, right?
Right.
It's not a deep thinking part of the brain, but it would be things like, if you found food, eat it. But not only eat it, but this whole learning based system was remember where it is. So then you can go back to get more food, right? So it
Hmm.
was this very strong, what do you need to survive? The new brain, which is really our prefrontal cortex, as it developed kind of over the old brain. Okay. So it's slower than the old brain, because the old brain is very efficient now, right? That's why
Dominant. Yeah.
we lose control of our emotions and things, because the old brain kicks in, and that's that. But the new brain is where we have actual, like, analytical thinking or creativity or decision making. And so you've got these two components of our brain that are constantly interacting or trying to overpower each other. So back when we were more primitive, it was really just physical survival. But as we've evolved with our newer brain, with the prefrontal cortex, we became aware, much more aware of things like our emotions, our feelings, started to recognize that a lot of those things didn't feel good, right?
Mm.
And so, as we know, the old brain just hasn't evolved very much. And so it's just basically positive and negative reinforcement, right? Ooh, this feels good, or this tastes good, or whatever, do more of it. And this feels bad, or whatever, do less of it. So it's this very simplistic black and white kind of thing. But with our emotions and feelings and behaviors, we start to get that discomfort, which everybody's familiar with, whether it's from trauma, whether it's just from a bad experience, whether it's just you're having a bad day, whatever it is. And who knows who the first person was that figured this out, but someone along the way was like, this feels bad. And then they maybe happened to eat a bowl of ice cream. And it was like, oh, I feel better. And the brain's reward system goes, oh, when I feel bad, if I eat ice cream, Cheez-Its, chocolate, whatever the case may be, I feel better. And the brain imprints that. This is a thing to do when you feel bad. And
Yeah.
this is really at the heart of where we get a lot of our addictions. The food thing, I've talked about this before, that I never thought I was an emotional eater. And then during the shutdowns, I discovered I was a big emotional eater. And so, uh, just in case anyone's interested, you can kind of check in with yourself. But the most addictive foods are pizza, chocolate, potato chips, ice cream, French fries, cake, and cheeseburgers. So basically, that reward based learning with the new
Mm.
brain is leveraged to trigger cravings now, right? Because it knows, oh, you feel bad. And it starts sending you that signal. order a pizza or grab the Lay's potato chips, like whatever it is. And then there are these things called addictive maximizers. So one of the most powerful one is intermittent reinforcement, which as we talk about this, I mean, I started to kind of get the chills because the whole world is designed now to keep us addicted, basically.
Yeah.
Okay? But this intermittent reinforcement means it's something unplanned or unexpected. Something happens. So when we get an unexpected reward, somebody gives you a present or anything that you weren't, it's not a normal part of your day or your routine, the dopamine neurons fire at a much higher rate than normal. So
when it's not something that is frequent, interesting. Right. Okay.
It goes woo woo, and you get flooded with dopamine, which makes you feel great, right? So the problem is, everybody's figured this out. I mean, big companies, tech companies, casinos, right? So gambling casinos figured out the exact formula that has slot machines hit just enough to keep you going. You've got that stimulus that's exciting and unexpected, and it keeps you going. And then they also know when to let you win, that you're going to stop. And so they give you that hit, and then you're like, oh my gosh. So that's how it's set up. Tech companies, of course, have taken full advantage of this, which we've talked about when we talk about technology with how to keep you scrolling and how to the automatic videos. But one of the really interesting things is that your notifications are an intermittent reinforcement. So when you
definitely
get the bell,
see that. I can definitely see that.
You get a hit of dopamine. So if you want to cut down on your addiction to technology in any form, turn off your notifications. Every time. It's like Pavlov's dog. You get a ding and you get a hit of dopamine because it's unexpected. And so you can see that we're just bombarded with it all day.
I can see too where if you get that feeling of that intermittent reinforcement and you enjoy that feeling, so you seek it out more, and then that becomes the addiction, and now you're looking for something else that's going to give you that intermittent, you know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely.
Fascinating. Yeah.
So we've got that all day long. Something's getting these little hits of dopamine, and again, the most important factor here is this is brain chemistry. Our brains are designed to do this. So when something happens that sparks those neurons, we get flooded with that dopamine, and it makes us feel good. So of course we're going to want more, and that's really the heart of addiction. Another everyday addiction maximizer is immediate availability. We didn't have this before. We didn't have where, oh, I feel bad. I'm going to order something through Grubhub and it'll be delivered right to my door.
Yeah.
Or, oh, I love that outfit that person's wearing. And right then on your phone, you can order it and it'll be at your house the next day.
I mean, we are an instant gratification society for sure.
Yeah. But the problem is our brains have not developed to handle this, which is why most people are addicted to something now. Everything is designed to get our attention now. And remember, this is about companies, corporations, stockholders all making money. So if they can get us to watch, eat, spend, whatever it is, then of course they're making more money. So they're all, who cares? So what if they're addicted? But for us, it's a matter of getting our sort of our minds back under our own control. And that is really a hard thing to do. And now the combination of you combine the old brain, the learning, right? The way the old brain learns with that intermittent reinforcement, with instant gratification, it's a perfect recipe to become addicted. Perfect.
Yeah. Yeah, it is fascinating. I mean, I think too, there's other factors, obviously, like you talked about, there's genetic factors and environmental factors, things like that.
Yeah.
But if there's a way that we can, like I said, become more self-aware so that we can recognize when, am I trying to numb myself to not deal with things? Is that where this is coming from? Because that's when I think that meditation and mindfulness can really help, because you don't have to fill a void, when you have that in your toolbox.
So, I mean, we should say too, there are non-mindfulness based, evidence-based strategies. Okay. And the challenge with them, the most studied as far as success It includes things like willpower, substitution, priming, celebrating, taking small steps, planning for failure. And all of those strategies are new brain functions.
Mm.
Okay. And the reason it feels so hard is that our new brain works great until we become stressed in any way. And that could be fatigue, anxiety, whatever it is. And then we trigger the fight or flight response, which means the old brain just shuts the new brain down.
Yeah.
So it's like it really feels like a fight. So I mean, if you think in terms like willpower, sure, willpower is a great thing to have. And hopefully we all have some, right? But it's not infinite and we wear down, which is why New Year's resolutions typically die by February. It's exhausting to keep fighting what your brain is trying to do, the chemicals are trying to do. The substitutions, in the old days, it was always, if you want to quit smoking, every time you want a cigarette, eat a piece of hard candy. And not that I'm saying hard candy is good for you, but they did. That was like one of the biggest tips all the time. What you're really doing, what could be doing is an addiction transfer.
Yeah.
Right? So now, instead of doing one negative thing for your health or your mind or, however you want to look at it, you're just replacing it with another. And the odds are you're not going to trade smoking for broccoli, right? It's going to be something else that's probably not very good for you. Those are great. And those work for some people. And again, it's going to depend on you, on your own, your personality, your history. It's going to depend on what you're addicted to. But the amazing thing about mindfulness is it targets both the old brain and the new brain. And I think that's why it's showing so much success in helping people overcome addictions. And it specifically targets the key links in the brain of rewards-based learning. So you're going right to the heart of what causes addiction. And again, I'm not saying this for substance abuse.
I was looking some info up, and I was on addiction.com website, and they were talking about how, different types of meditation therapy really do. I mean, there's many studies that show how it helps with addiction. And it said, for example, transcendental meditation, which puts you in a totally different state. There's different forms of meditation. Obviously, there's mindfulness, there's Zen, there's different forms, but transcendental really does put you into a different mind state, changes the brain waves, and it's been used to reduce drug, alcohol, and nicotine abuse. And more importantly, it stops the impulse to, those triggers and then the risk for relapse. So, these therapies really can help.
It prevents relapses by increasing awareness of the triggers. It combines cognitive behavioral strategies with mindfulness practices. It helps recognize and cope with the triggers and high risk situations. So again, like you were saying, when you meditate regularly, of any kind really, you're changing the neuropathy of your brain. So you're breaking those automatic connections and sort of rewiring things. You can't do that by meditating once. You have to meditate regularly, at least 20 minutes each day. So it's a commitment. So not only can it help you with addictions, but it can also just help with the anxiety, because a lot of the addictions are trying to get rid of the anxiety, right? We're trying to get rid of that feeling. Mindfulness relapse prevention also teaches skills to surf cravings rather than acting on them. That might be something we should talk about in an upcoming episode, because mindfulness and meditation can help you learn to basically, as we get these surges of emotions, cravings, desires, compulsions, to create some space between that feeling and our mind, and then we can learn to ride it like a wave. So it's a really interesting concept that I know works really well, but it does require practice. There's also benefits of mindfulness in addiction recovery. So again, if you're in therapy or you're pursuing some other form of rehabilitation, mindfulness, of course, reduces stress. It improves your emotional regulation. It increases your self-awareness, that's, again, I know we've said it like 5 times now, but it's being aware of what's happening so that you can then address it. And then it also enhances the ability to tolerate discomfort without turning to substances. So I thought that was very interesting, as far as it's kind of the answer for all kinds of emotional distress, including addiction, which I think is very helpful.
I think another thing that happens is when a person recognizes that they are in addiction, there enters this self-loathing. Yes. And there's a lot of cruelty that we put upon ourselves because we've disappointed ourselves. How could I get to this point? I'm such an idiot. All of these things enter your head. And I think one thing that meditation and especially mindfulness really help with is self-compassion and it's acceptance. When you get to that point and you're able to just accept, okay, well, this is where I'm at. What can I do now? It really will help you get past that point of self-loathing, and you really can start to love yourself and really accept the fact that I'm human and I'm doing my best and I'm going to continue to do my best. And I think that's really helpful.
I do too. And it's a really good point because the amount of guilt and shame,
Mhm.
think of, maybe a person with a gambling addiction. They could be harming their entire family,
Yeah.
by losing all the money or
Mhm.
losing the house or um, alcohol addiction, which is the biggest addiction, substance addiction we have in this country. It could be, you can't keep your job.
Yeah.
So you're not just hurting yourself. That's why I was saying with especially substance abuse, you tend to be hurting yourself and others. But even behaviors, I mean, you can have some behaviors that are, for instance, you're up gaming all night, so you don't feel like going to work the next day. I mean,
Mhm.
don't underestimate the power of behaviors either.
Well, and you were
Um,
talking earlier too about the replacement,
mhm.
and I came across something that I was surprised at, but I recognize it that exercise
Yes,
can be an addiction.
yes,
And
it
I
can.
remember when I was teaching hot yoga frequently, we'd have the same people come in, and they were, I mean, several times a day into hot yoga. And that's actually really not good for your body. You should not be at those elevated temperatures, especially for women. It can really throw your hormones off. But these people were addicted to it because it truly does. It gives you that sense of euphoria and it gives you that, sense of calm and, just centeredness. And it's almost too much of a good thing.
Yeah, yeah,
So even things like exercise can really be an addiction. And it's important to try to recognize those things too. It's as soon as it starts to become harmful, like you said earlier,
yeah,
you know, it can be a habit until all of a sudden you can't do without it and it's harming you or people around you.
yeah. And again, a lot of, you could say in some cases maybe it's denial, but truly, I think a lot of people like, I've always done this, and they don't realize
Yeah.
they've crossed over until you try to stop doing it. It's not that habits all turn into addictions. Habits are just part of addictive circumstances. The habit thing is important in a lot of ways because habits are created from that same learning system that we have, right?
Mm.
And they save us time. Many habits are very beneficial to us. But we currently spend over 47% of our time in habitual behavior. That means we're kind of mindless half the time. We're not paying attention to what we're doing or what we're feeling. Um, so the habit, I don't know if we've talked about it on the podcast before. We do certainly talk about it a lot in workshops, but habits are really basically a three-part process, which is there's a cue or a trigger, then
Mm-hmm.
there's the routine, what do you do, what's the behavior, and then there's a reward, what's the reward. So one of the ways mindfulness can help with addiction is along these same lines, breaking that habit loop so that you're very aware of each of those three factors.
Well, it's
And what,
important too to let people know that you can't remove a habit.
right?
Like you can't get rid of a habit. You can change it, but you can't completely eliminate a habit. You just
Yeah.
have to replace it.
Yeah, it's almost like an overlay. The old
Mm-hmm.
habit, they can see it. I think it's on fMRIs where they've discovered this, but the original habit is always, it's imprinted on your brain and it stays. But you can create a new habit that overlays it. And I thought that was fascinating when we first learned it too, because
Mm-hmm.
it explains why so many people relapse.
Yeah.
If they let go of the new habit, even for, a very short period of time, that old one is underneath there, raring to come up and say, go ahead, have that drink, smoke that cigarette. One of the things you can do, which is a component of mindfulness, is switch to curiosity. So if you think in terms of old brain, it's powerful and it's, got you stuck in this survival thing. But if you can switch over to curiosity, that's a different part of the brain. So you're opening up resources of the old brain instead of all of the energy going to survival. So, just ask yourself, why am I doing this? Do I really want to do this? What triggered that? You just ask the questions. You don't have to have the answers. Maybe you will find the answers, but it's the getting out of the mode, the survival mode, to question it that really then helps the old brain relax instead of it being on such high alert. And then it's going to be more accepting of a shift or a change than it would be if it's in full blown survival mode, right?
Mm.
Which is
Yeah,
fight and
that
flight.
makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Addiction is so complex. Experts understand, they still don't understand it fully.
No, I was even looking at the genetic factors, and they still can't pinpoint an exact gene or anything
Right.
that has that change that causes that addiction. Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, if you think of in terms of intergenerational trauma, for
Mhm.
instance, that changes our DNA. So if you had, ancestors that were in the Depression or that went through World War I or something, the Holocaust, several generations down, they can see a change in the DNA. I don't see why it couldn't be something along those same lines, that it changed the DNA however long ago. And so it doesn't mean you have it. I mean, it doesn't mean you're going to be an addict. It means you've got the possibility is higher because of a possible change in DNA. The substance addictions are really, to me, frightening because that so we know for sure, even though if we don't know exactly where it comes from or how it starts, we know it's brain chemistry based. And
Hmm.
so when you get into the issues with opioids, for instance, that is a powerful alteration of your brain. I know they have therapies to help with this, obviously, but um, when you were talking about like the shame or the self blame or feeling awful about yourself, can you imagine how difficult that has to be that this isn't good for you or for others, whatever the case may be, but you literally cannot stop it.
Yeah.
And you can tell from the opioid epidemic that it's not like that many people went, oh, I just want to, throw my life down the tubes. They
Hmm.
they don't want it, but it's so powerful. So I think with something like that, when you think in terms of mindfulness, not only the compassion and the self-forgiveness, but to just start being aware of how this works. It's not because it's your fault. It's because you've been introduced to something. And I'm going to even say, I'm not trying to condone like, just use whatever recreational drugs you want. But I think most people don't wake up and go, I'm going to go try a drug that's going to cause
Yeah.
damage to me. I think it gets introduced somehow, or you're at a party, or you get a prescription, and then it starts, and then you're really stuck with it. Behavior is kind of the same thing.
Yeah.
You probably started a behavior for a reason, right?
Hmm.
It either helped you or it made you feel better or, whatever it is. And it was like, oh, and it seemed harmless enough. So try mindfulness to get your mind wrapped around you're human. And addiction is classified as the disease now, which means you need some kind of help or support, whether it's information, whether it's a doctor, whether it's a therapist, whether it's a practice like mindfulness. But I don't even know how to say this strongly enough. Don't expect you to be able to just solve it through pure willpower or
Yeah.
by toughing it out because it's just more suffering. You
Yeah.
know, we need support.
I also was reading some information on mental health issues and the prevalence of people with a diagnosed mental disorder that also have a substance abuse disorder. And it's like a 50% increase. And
Yeah.
so I think it's important too. We'll give you some resources. I think it's really important to not only recognize if you are going through addiction, recognize that moment when you feel like I need help, but also seek out mental health, not just substance abuse health. A lot of them may go hand in hand, but
Good
you
point.
may have something underlying that is, kind of causing the behavioral or the substance abuse issue. And, like you've got OCD, you've got things like that where you're going to have behaviors that probably are addictive because you're trying to sort of calm the mind when that's probably not going to help.
Such a good point.
Yeah.
Such a good point. Definitely seek help if you
Mhm.
have a serious challenge here where there's harm involved. At the same time, for everyone who thinks I'm not addicted to anything, because I'm sure when I said we're almost all addicted, there were lots of people that, well, I'm not addicted to
I'm
anything.
not.
Um, I would just suggest that maybe you try not doing something that you normally do and see how you feel. And if you get a strong feeling of discomfort, that's awareness, right? And then
Yeah.
you can start taking steps to really address it from an addiction perspective instead of, oh
Mhm.
no, I only do it for fun. Or,
Yeah.
we always overestimate our own positive attributes, which is good in some ways, but not in cases where we're doing something harmful.
Yeah. Yeah. And, like I said earlier, too, just remember that you're human. It's okay. You don't have to be hating on yourself about it. There's so many resources for us, and you are not alone. I mean, there are a lot of people that are addicted to things, regardless of what it is. And, just take those little steps to try to make yourself feel better without the addictive, item that you're using to feel better. Maybe try to remove it and see what happens.
Yeah. Well, and too, and again, this has to do with where we are in history. Life really does feel more overwhelming than it used to feel.
Mm-hmm.
Good or bad. Some people handle it well, some people don't. I'm not even saying it's good or it's too much a lot of the times. We're just sort of stimulated all the time. And so there's nothing more natural than wanting to have a little peace or shut things out for a while. Or, it's just normal. The problem is, because of all of the things we've talked about, we've got too many avenues, options, instant access to things that give a quick hit. And so that's where we really want to look at alternatives. That would be a great way to substitute. I want to relax. How can I relax? Well, I could binge watch 24 episodes of a program while eating pick your junk food, or I could try meditating for 10 minutes. You know what I mean? And you'll get the same effect, but without the harmful side effects. So, interesting topic. And just know that not only should you have compassion for yourself, but I think we all have compassion, most of us at least, for each other when we're struggling. And we wish you really the best in trying to resolve it.
We do. And like I said, I will put some resources in the notes for you guys. And we're here. If you have any questions, we'd love to hear from you.
Definitely. Well, thank you so much. And we hope to see you back here next time.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
This podcast is part of the Airwave Media Podcast Network. Visit airwavemedia.com to listen and subscribe to other great shows. Visit our website, amindfulmoment.com, to access podcasts, scripts, and reading recommendations. A Mindful Moment is hosted by Teresa McKee and Melissa Sims. This podcast is produced by Work to Live Productions. Thank you for tuning in.